Hey friends, welcome back to the Guitar Max channel. This video is part one of my lengthy interview with legendary shred guitarist Chris Impellitteri. Chris has been touring the world and releasing awesome shred albums for more than 30 years, and I would argue that he is one of the most consistent, technically advanced guitarists of the genre. Now, the band Impellitteri has a new 3-disc anthology album, and so right now was basically the perfect time for me to talk with Chris about the anthology and also just ask him some of the questions that I've been wondering for years. In this first part of the interview, we talk about the longevity of his career, how he built his chops, where he got his sense of melody and his songwriting skills, and we even delve into some questions about unreleased songs that have been floating around YouTube for years. Now, this whole interview is very long, so I will be releasing it in a few different parts, but let's go ahead and jump into part one right now. Real quick, if you enjoy videos like this, cool new guitars, interviews with great guitar players, and also staying up in all the latest news in the guitar universe, and you have not already subscribed, please consider subscribing right now. Okay, let's go ahead and get into part one of my interview with Chris Impellitteri. Chris.
Maxwell.
Thank you very much for doing the interview, man.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
I'm humbled. And humbled by what you've already done for our band.
I'm happy to do it. Impellitteri is a fantastic band and a prolific band, which we're going to talk about today. But, you know, obviously the band is very, very popular in some places and not as popular in other places. And it's a band that I always want to tell people about. So I'm happy to be talking to you.
Thanks for sharing the word. Yeah, you know, we don't really like ourselves, but we're glad when other people do. Kidding.
Well, I think to start off with, I mean, like we talked a little bit before we started the interview. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about a lot of guitar stuff today because I've seen interviews with you in the past, and people have talked a lot about your career and music business and that kind of stuff. But I want to talk a little bit more about guitar technique and guitar playing and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But to start off with, I'm looking at your discography here. And you've got the Impellitteri, the Black EP, Stand in Line, Grin and Bear It, Victim of the System, Answer to the Master, Screaming Symphony, Fuel for the Fire, Eye of the Hurricane, Lie Fast Loud, which I think is the only official live album. There's a bunch of bootlegs out there.
Yeah, that was actually done by someone who's kind of like a fan of our band. We gave them permission. We had nothing to do with that. It was literally, they compiled live footage, which we loved because we knew we couldn't doctor it.
Fake
it, right? Because a lot of live albums are live in the studio.
Yeah.
So, but yes.
So, Lie Fast Loud, Crunch, System X, which is one of my favorite albums, and then you've got a best of Faster Than the Speed of Light, although at this point that's an old best of, right?
Yeah.
Then you got Pedal to the Metal, Wicked Maiden, and then after Wicked Maiden you did Animetal USA, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then back to Impellitteri, Venom, The Nature of the Beast, and now you have Wake the Beast, the anthology. I think that qualifies you as prolific.
Or old.
But I mean, I'm looking at the discography here. Starting in 87, you've got a bit of a gap between Stand in Line and Grin and Bear It. You've done an album almost every 2 years since the early 90s.
Yeah, sometimes farther apart, but that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were even on a recent Alcatraz album, also, I believe.
Completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
But yes, I did.
So the thing is, but if you go back to even the Black EP, the first Impellitteri release, you still sound like the same guitarist on that album. So your technique and your ability was already pretty developed by then. What was the sort of process you went through in terms of developing your technique and your skill as a guitarist? And in particular, I'm thinking of if there was a period of time where you were just practicing, you know, I feel like most guitar players who are advanced guitar players had a period of time in their lives where all they did was practice. And did you have that? And what was that for you?
Probably when I became obsessed with the instrument, where I was playing like 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
Probably about 15 years old.
Okay.
But musically speaking, I wasn't as advanced, right? I mean, at that time, I was really influenced by guys like Gary Moore,
Right.
Brian May of Queen, of course, Ritchie Blackmore. And I was just starting to understand or be exposed to guys like John McLaughlin and Al Di Meola. But I certainly didn't understand what they were doing. So a lot of the stuff I was doing was really pentatonic based. And of course, with Blackmore, you started realizing, oh, you can do harmonic minor, diminished. You started learning some of those things. But I'd probably say about 15 is where I got obsessed. This is where you're going to laugh at me. So when you say practiced all the time, I still do. I'm not kidding. I mean, like when I'm done, we're doing like this press stuff now, as I was telling you earlier. But when I'm done with this, I mean, tonight I'll be in there practicing, For me, I'm one of those guys where I've never felt like I was naturally gifted. I feel like I'm constantly evolving. I go through my phases where I guess people say I'm really good, but I also go through my phases where I suck. Seriously, I've gone through those phases, and proudly, admittedly, So for me, I'm constantly playing because I always know I can be better. Or at least I want to challenge myself to attempt to be better, if that makes sense.
Sure, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've kind of thought about is if you go back and listen to your early stuff, in particular, I think Stand in Line, and then you listen to something like Wicked Maiden or Venom or The Nature of the Beast, like I said earlier, you sound like the same guitar player, but you're not just redoing what you've already done. I mean, you do sound like you are still experimenting and that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's pretty rare for guitar players that have been playing for a long time. I mean, people talk about, I won't mention names, but they're pretty common names for most people. But it's like, oh, he's making the same album again. He's made that album 10 times or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think you really fall into that. And so I guess, through the 90s and then through the 2000s into now, what are the changes that you've noticed in your own playing?
I'd probably say I become more knowledgeable referencing music theory, right? Because I always find every day I learn something, how to apply a scale to a specific musical passage we're playing, right? I mean, for example, everybody knows, if you're playing like E, F, G sharp, A, blah, 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 you just play A harmonic minor, right? But for me, every day I realize, I can play, I didn't realize I could play 30-second note triplets over this tempo based on what the kick pattern's playing. I know this is getting a little weird, but when I play, I usually play off the drummer, right? And so I found over the years, I really focus on the groove, and that really affects the way I play. Versus me just, counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 3, 3, 4, I'm listening to the ands, right? The upbeats, and that affects the way I play. So I think over time, as I evolve, I think that's been something that I've noticed to myself. I realize, I'm playing off of this versus the way I used to play.
So when
it's a horrible explanation.
No,
I hope you understand.
No, that makes sense. So when you write, like when you're coming up with new riffs and that kind of stuff, do you like to write to a drum beat or something like that?
So the way I write, and I'm sure just probably the way you do it, we're all playing guitar all the time, right? So we're playing, and you know how it is. You're probably shredding, and all of a sudden you hear something, go, what was that? And you try to remember, and you try to quickly do it over before you forget it.
Yeah.
That's where it begins.
Okay.
So I'll be doing doing all that stuff, and then all of a sudden, and that's just to keep, the muscle memory going, right? So it's just, making sure right hand and left hand are syncing. So I'm constantly practicing, but it's that slip. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what was that? And the eyebrow goes up, and you're like, wait, we got to do that again. And then immediately, if I start to really like the riff, the first thing I do is I grab, an iPad, an iPhone, something, record it immediately.
Right. Yeah.
If I'm really into it, I will run. I'll show you a room in there. I have, I'll take a little drum machine, put it in a little Porta Studio, and literally find the tempo and just hit record, and here I go. Because I've got a click track going at all times, so I just start playing, and it is the oddest thing. I've noticed over the last few years, especially, I notice when I write, I know this is going to sound spiritual and weird, but it's truthful. It's, as I say, I'll play something, I'll slip and realize, oh my God, it's really cool. What was that? And before I know it, I don't know why my hands are going where they're going, but all of a sudden I feel like there's this higher power. I'm not saying God or whatever, but I feel like this power is literally coming through me, channeling. I'm just off on this adventure mode. Where the hell are we going? And literally within about 4 or 5 minutes, I pretty much have the intro, right? Which means I've got the riff, I've got the verse, I've got the pre-chorus, I've got the chorus, right? Then it usually repeats with our typical kind of formula, maybe bridge into the solo. And usually within 4 or 5 minutes, the best songs are done.
Right.
And at least the rough template.
Sure, yeah.
And I've noticed over the years, especially the latter part of my playing, I've realized, wow, that's something I didn't do or notice as much in the early years.
Okay.
You know, so it literally is. And you know, I mean, haven't you ever done that where you're playing and you stumble on something, like, oh, what was that?
Oh, yeah.
And you do it again, right? And before you know it, you're on that journey. You don't even know why you're on that journey. It's just, it's coming to you.
Yeah.
Flowing through you.
I think one of the things that characterizes your playing, not just the riffs, but also really your lead stuff, I would describe you as a very inside player, meaning you have outside players who use a lot of dissonant sounds. You use a lot of, in my opinion, you use a lot of very clear melodic lines. Even when you're playing fast, it has a melody to it. How did you, like early on, where did your melodic sense come from? I mean, was there particular, I don't know, like when you were a little kid, you heard certain bands early on that gave you, or classical music or something like that?
Well, I've always loved melody. You know, I have to be careful when I start throwing out words like Vivaldi, because we know who we're going to get compared to. But in all sincerity, I've always loved Vivaldi. The Four Seasons, the violin concertos. It's something about the way he composed music. He always had a strong melody or a melodic structure to it. So again, it doesn't matter how fast you're playing, right? It doesn't really matter the tempo, but does it have a melody? And it's interesting, even from the Impellitteri Black EP, which for the people that don't know who we are, you can Google songs like Lost in the Rain, right? And even the song, when I did Stand in Line, that solo, we were playing obnoxiously too fast, and I recognized that, right? But I was trying to also express myself in a way that somehow miraculously this could still have some sort of melodic structure to it.
Right.
Even though, I mean, like the first run, I remember it's 3 notes per string. So it's like 15, and then I do it's D, G, B, E. So all right, so we have 12, so 27, 39 notes. So at first I'm what? And I kept doing it, but once it fell into place, it was the oddest thing to our ears. It was like, that's actually melodic. How's that possible? This is total masturbation. Yeah. Right. So, but it's back to like composers like Vivaldi, right? Mozart, Bach. I love that stuff, you know. And listen, and even going back to melodies of players like how Jeff Beck plays. I mean, Jeff Beck's probably one of my secret influences I don't talk a lot about. I love Jeff Beck, you know. Blow by Blow, Wired. I mean, I listen to his playing and you're like, where do these melodies come from? You know, so it's always been a huge part of my playing. And especially after the Stand in Line record, it really became more dominant. It almost, I force myself now to make certain that the solos, even if they're fast and technical, they have to have a very strong melodic content. Right. And I do that mainly because in the, I'd say probably around the Stand in Line era, we had people, yes, that loved us, but believe me, and it's not that they were wrong. We had critics that hated my guts, called me a wanker, all this stuff. But to be fair to them, there was a period of time where I look back at myself and went, oh my God, they're right. They're telling the truth. And you just have to swallow that pride. And from there on, I realized, what was I doing wrong? Right? At least at the points where it was wrong, right? And I realized, you're losing focus of melody, right? And it was a great lesson for me. So, you know, that's probably why you hear, especially from like Grin and Bear It On, right? All the records, a lot of the records that are on this Wake the Beast, you can hear how fast I mature because I got slapped in the face and it hurt. And you realize, yeah, but they're right. So take all of this speed and technique and harness it, and then make certain that when you apply it to the song, first of all, it has to fit the song, has to complement the song, but it has to be melodious. Right. So that's kind of it.
Okay. Well, I mean, Grin and Bear It definitely sounds very different from Stand in Line. And that was, and I mean, Grin and Bear It sounds more like a melodic rock record as opposed to Stand in Line. Although, you know, Stand in Line, obviously, that was the first album with Graham Bonnet. But there are, is it Secret Lover on there? I mean, there are some very like power metal songs on that album. Yeah. But, well, I mean, I think when it comes to melody, I mean, you could have something where, you know, maybe the melody is defined by certain notes. Your starting note, maybe there's some mid notes that change, that hit when the chord changes happen, and you have a resolution at the end or something. And you can put in a whole bunch of other notes in between. It doesn't change the melody so much, but when you have those really, really fast passages, it kind of like conveys the same melody, but with a greater intensity or something like that. I kind of think of speed that way. It's like if you want to, you can do one melody, and then you can do the same melody, but like tremolo picking, right? Where you're just doing like 4 or 6 of the same note with the same melodic movement, but that increased speed, somehow it takes the melody and it makes it more aggressive or something like that. And I think a lot of the stuff on, I think, Stand in Line is kind of like that, where there's a melody there, but the extra notes increase the speed, and it just increases the I don't know, like the sense of urgency or something like that.
Yeah, I'm always trying to excite the song.
Right, right.
I've always believed the guitar solo is very much like frosting on a cake. And it's there to, I don't know, in some way enhance the song because there is the danger of you're just showing off, right? And I think that takes away from the song. So I try to make certain, especially at this point in my career when we write music, I try to make certain that it has purpose, but it does, it somehow energizes a song. And believe me, most of the stuff we're playing already is high energy, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my take on the speed thing. Oh, and I'm so sorry. You did ask me, though, early on, who are some of the people, though, outside of Jeff Beck. Brian May would have been another one who was really important. Yeah. Right, to me, especially in my, in the early years, right? Because I was listening to a lot of stuff like Stone Cold Crazy, the heavier side of Queen, right? Sheer Heart Attack, Tie Your Mother Down. But the one thing I learned from Brian May was his solos were really lyrical. Yeah. And I love the way he orchestrated his solos, which is another thing I do a lot in the studio. We tend to play a lot of the stuff live, and then we color it, which means we'll add on to it, add 3-part harmonies and do the orchestration afterwards just to kind of enhance it, right? Right. But a lot of that came from Brian May. And then, of course, like I said earlier, Gary Moore was a huge one. Everything from, I don't know if you've ever heard of G-Force records with Gary Moore. Yeah. Loved G-Force, right? All of that stuff, And people know Gary Moore for, Still Got the Blues and all that stuff. But I like Gary the rocker guy.
Oh, yeah, me too.
So, anyway, so that was a big portion of my playing as well.
Okay. Another thing I want to ask you about, this is maybe something for the future, but when I'm looking through the different Impellitteri albums, not all of them, but many of them will have one instrumental track on them. And you've released so many albums, at this point, you have enough instrumental tracks to do an entire instrumental album.
I knew you were going there.
So would you ever consider doing that?
I've thought about it, but, there's something that plagues this band, and it's my own fault. It is obviously my surname, right? Impellitteri. And there's a reason why it's called my last name. But in all sincerity, we fight often to convince people this is a band. Right. This has never been the Chris Impellitteri solo show, nor do I want it to be. I never wanted to be a solo guy. And it's not, and listen, I love guys. I love the Satrianis and the Vais and the Yngwies. I love all of them. I think they're wonderful players and they influence me. But I always wanted to be in a band. Like in the early days, I wanted to be that guy who was just part of a functioning unit where you had 4 or 5 guys contributing. That excites me, and that's systemic from, especially like Van Halen's probably my biggest influence, right? Okay. Early Van Halen. So, I always wanted to be that guy, but I thought, well, I'll try to rise to the level of whatever is expected of me as the guitar player, but I also want the singer to also, have that respect and support and also contribute to our music so I don't have to be that guy writing everything. Yeah.
Singers are overrated though, really.
I got to be honest, I'm so lucky. I mean, the two main guys that we've had over the years, I mean, they're really, first of all, they're really good human beings. Rob Rock is the sweetest human being in the world. He has no ego, and he certainly could have an ego. Sure. Same thing with Bonnet. Graham, I mean, working with Graham on the 2 records we did, he was just a great human being, I mean, sure, we had little issues here and there, but just a good person. So no lead singer disease, thank God for these guys. These guys were just motivated, especially when we were doing our records. So, I'm lucky in that aspect. But that's, so the reason I haven't done the instrumental thing, I don't want to cement that, oh, I knew what he is. He's one of those guys, For me, it's like, no, man, I'm the guitar player in the band,
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think Van Halen is a good analogy, right? I mean, Eddie never did an instrumental album, right? I mean, he could have. I mean, at the same time, I mean, obviously this is up to you, but at the same time, I think there are so many guitar players in the world, all over the world, that are paying attention to what you do and studying what you do. And I mean, there's probably hundreds of people covering, to the best of their ability, 17th century chicken picking or something like that, like these videos on YouTube. I think there is an audience for it if you ever wanted to do it. But I understand what you're saying about it's a band, not the Chris Impellitteri show.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in all sincerity, you're right. I mean, now that I think about it, there's probably 8 or 9 instrumental songs that we've done over the years, and in the markets we play, they seem to be well received.
Sure.
So it certainly would give me a running head start if I wanted to do a full, instrumental album. But it just, for me at that point, like I said, I just feel like I'm conceding. I'm like, yep, you're right, and I don't want to, I just want to be the guitar player in the band. So
right. So now, one more thing about instrumental songs. Floating around the depths of YouTube, there is some live footage. I think it's from early 2000, like 2000-ish era, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. And it's you doing 2 instrumental songs that I don't think have ever been released.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about?
Is it, we call one the Screaming Symphony?
One Screaming Symphony, but it's not on the Screaming Symphony
There's
album.
a reason for that. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and one's called Space Jazz.
yeah. So we were doing, as a favor to a really good friend of mine, he actually is now over at Line 6 in Yamaha. He was one of the heads of product development for JBL.
Okay.
And so they asked us, hey, we want you guys to play 3 days at the NAMM show.
Okay.
And it's in this little studio room. It's one of these controlled booths. No more than maybe 100 people in there. Very, very tiny and small. It was Glenn Sobel, myself, James, our bass player, and Ed Roth, the keyboard player. And we had 7 days before the show to come up with some quick instrumentals.
Really?
On the spot.
You came up with those.
We did, and I will never forget this. You want to hear a great story? So Glenn Sobel, for the people that don't know Glenn is now playing with Alice Cooper, also with Johnny Depp in Hollywood.
Yeah.
In his mother's closet. Okay. Their house at that time was in West Hills.
Okay. We
would take our gear, I'm not kidding, go into the house, beautiful house, go through the mom and dad's bedroom into this massive closet. That's where we rehearsed. I had my Marshall Abstract. Okay. It was the funniest thing. For 7 days we were in there, and we started coming up with these pieces of music. We're like, this is really cool. And so we played the NAMM show. We did it for 3 days. I remember some kids were just cameras in our face.
Yeah.
And I remember someone uploaded it and seeing especially the song Screaming Symphony. I went, you know what? That is perfect. Here we are in this tiny, tiny little room.
Yeah.
One take.
Right.
It's not Pro Tools. You can't fake it. Can't go back and, oh crap, I messed up on that.
Totally live. Yeah.
Every mistake, it's all there. It's documented. I thought, there it is. And I've done Screaming Symphony live in concert in Japan many times.
Okay.
That instrumental, is part of the solo. And it goes over so well. And I thought, you know what? Yes, I could do it in the studio.
Right.
And we could probably do it a lot better. But no. I thought, I want to have one song that is documented, that we did it live on the spot.
Is there ever a live version that's been released? Like
there probably is. Okay. I mean, Screaming Symphony, we played that many times in the year, especially in the early 2000s in Japan.
Okay.
A lot of those tours, we did it constantly.
Okay.
There must be out there footage somewhere.
Okay. So. Okay. All right. Well, that kind of clears up some of that stuff. But people
isn't that kind of an interesting thing, though?
Oh yeah.
Could you imagine if you and I were talking and said, "Hey, let me here. I'll play bass or drums or whatever," and you start playing, you're just hitting it, and it's just working, and we're documenting it, and that's it.
Right.
Release it. Yeah. And this becomes part of your legacy. And I think it's the coolest thing. I would like that. So that's why I haven't gone back in and said, all right, let me perfect it. No. And I also thought it would be great for the people that think, can he play or can he not? I mean,
sure.
I'm not cheating. I can't.
It's no studio.
I don't even know who the person was that recorded the damn thing, but the camera's in my face, so it's like you see how I'm picking everything, and that's it.
And when that was around 2000? Do I have that right?
I think it was. It must have been either that or late 90s,
Okay,
somewhere in that. It had to have been around there.
Yeah, so 2 decades later, people are still watching this every day on
Yeah,
YouTube.
but it's not. There are not a lot of hits on it. It's pretty quiet in that world.
Okay,
Someday maybe I'll expose it. I'll bring. Well,
Yeah.
you are now, but
Right, yeah,
maybe
that's
I'll bring
true.
more attention. But yeah, it's and you know what's funny? So what did we do? Oh my God! I just realized something. Yeah, it had to be early 90s because then we eventually released the record "Screaming Symphony."
So that was
That
before the
song,
album.
It was around that time.
Wow, okay.
But it's funny
That's
because
interesting.
people have gone, why is that not on the
Yeah,
record?
right.
I thought it was such a weird, cool thing to do. Maybe I'm on crack, I don't know. But I thought this is really neat. Let's do it this way.
Well, I'm glad that it's out there for people to still see it. Because, I mean, it captured a moment in time, right?
Yeah, and I'll never forget. I remember Bob Bradshaw had just modded my Marshall 100-watt head, and all I did is it was actually the one in that magazine. It was my 71 Strat, original single coil Fender pickups, nothing in the front end, straight into the Marshall. I had a Lexicon PCM 42 in the effects loop,
Okay.
a little bit of delay, and it's one of the best soloing tones I've ever gotten. Like that's what I need to go back out and get
Right.
because I sold the PCMs.
Oh, no.
I need to get more. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so sorry. That was the story of that song.
So we've got a few more technical questions here I want to go over. But the other thing, it was kind of, because you were talking about singers earlier and Rob Rock, one thing that's really kind of fun is to look at Impellitteri, the career of the band, and also look at Rob Rock's career. Because, late 90s, you had Eye of the Hurricane. I think Crunch, Rob Rock was on Crunch, and then System X was with Graham Bonnet.
Yeah.
But right around that time, that early 2000s time period, Rob Rock released a bunch of really good solo albums.
Really good. And thanks, his buddy Roy Z was on that stuff. It
Roy
was
Z.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Rage of Creation, Holy Hell. There were like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different albums that he had. Eyes of Eternity. Another kind of funny thing, which I always think about when I think of Screaming Symphony, the song is not on the Screaming Symphony album. Rob Rock has the exact same thing. He has a song called Rage of Creation, which is not on the Rage of Creation album. It's on a different album, which is totally confusing.
Yeah.
But so System X is, again with Graham Bonnet, and that is a really cool album.
That was my revenge for Stand in Line, to be honest.
Okay. Is that sort of like the Graham Bonnet album you wished you could have made? Yes. That kind of thing? Okay.
Very much so. When we did Stand in Line, Rob Rock and I had, we had, our debut was what we call the Impellitteri Black EP. Mm-hmm. And it had songs like Lost in the Rain, Burning. And when we released that, we did it, it was like self-financed. So we were really poor. We didn't have much money. I remember we went into the studio, and again, a lot of that was recorded live, except for the vocal part. And we couldn't spend a lot of time in the studio. So a bunch of room mics went up and we just played, right? So we released the record. We eventually got signed with Sony and Relativity, and we started to develop really quickly a cult following, especially in places like Europe. Europe really took off for us. Japan did as well. And so all of a sudden there was a lot of buzz about who is this band, and a lot of people were starting to pay attention to us. And I remember it was right after Kerrang! Magazine, which at that time was the biggest kind of metal magazine at that time in the world. They gave us like a 5 out of 5, I think, review. It was like as good as it got, or somewhere close to it.
Yeah.
And we had so much interest in the band. We got signed, and Rob Rock sits me down and goes, "Hey, dude," I'm like, "What?" He goes, I've been talking with Dieter Dirks, who was a very famous producer who had produced the band The Scorpions. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Dieter wants me to fly out next week to Germany and work with one of his bands." And I'm like, "What?" Mm. And it was like, yeah. He goes, I want to take a different direction. And I'm thinking, well, we're done. We're screwed. He's half of the sound of the band. Mm-hmm. I listen to that Scream and Lost in the Rain, that opening scream. I mean, it sets up that this isn't just about me. It's about him as well. So Rob decided to go and do the thing with Dieter. I was heartbroken, and I remember running across Graham. We were friends already, and Graham would say, "Hey, what's up?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm bummed. Singer quit." Kind of. It reminds me of like the Van Halen story at a much lower level. Right? Yeah. But it was that story, and he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I just ended my band Alcatraz, and which I loved Alcatraz." Like, yeah, it sucks. So before you know it, we decided, well, let's see what we can do together. But there was a hold on. if you listen to our Black EP, we really started out almost like a thrash band, right? With screaming vocals, yes, the technical guitar solos and the shredding, but for the most part, it's really high energy. It was almost like we wanted to be like Priest and Maiden on steroids, right? Almost venturing into like Ride the Lightning, Metallica kind of stuff with more melodic vocals. But with Graham, I wasn't sure we could do that. And at that point, I was really young. When I think we started Stand in Line, I was either 21 or 22, right? I remember thinking, shit, now I love Blackmore, but it's not the direction that we started with, nowhere near it. So with Stand in Line, I went, okay, let's kind of do more of a tribute to what Graham was well known for, which to me, the biggest record he had done at that time was Rainbow, Down to Earth. So we went down that road, and I got to be honest, I was pretty uncomfortable, right? Because I was out of my territory, at least the vision that I had for the band with that Black EP, we were kind of detouring, right? And so the first song we wrote was Stand in Line. And I remember that song. I was like, okay, when he started singing, it gave me chills. I actually wrote the song on a keyboard, right? The riff.
Yeah.
And, but when we were doing that record, I was, like I say, I felt like I was out of my element. Also, the label built a band around us. So we had Pat Torpy on drums, who was amazing. He was like the father figure of that record. He guided us. But everybody in the band was 10 plus years older than me. So I was kind of like, and Chuck Wright, another amazing bass player. So we had these great guys, and I didn't want to let them down. And I didn't want to speak up and say, no, this is not heavy enough for me, right? Anyways, we went down the road with Stand in Line. And, you know, to this day, I'm grateful to certain songs on that record, right? Stand in Line, we play that live. I don't care where we are. The fists go up, and every person in that audience sing every song, which is just incredible. But I was never thrilled with the record. You know, when they mixed it, I was so angry. I mean, the guy who mixed the record, nothing negative towards him, but he buried my solos and reverb and delay. I'm like, dude, if you listen to that stuff dry, it's perfect. The articulation, it's just like System X, it's just like that. I'm like, I can barely hear the solos. It's so washed out, you know?
Yeah.
So I was just so frustrated with that record, which was, in some ways, good for me because the frustration led to my work discipline, saying never again will I ever yield control to anybody, you know, controlling this band, engineers, mixing guys, whatever, you know. So, but anyway, so when we did Stand in Line, you know, after that, the record did its thing, you know, it did really well. We were on MTV a lot in the late 80s. Japan, I don't know why, we just blew up. It's like we went from zero to hero overnight, you know. Played some massive places, and then of course in Graham out he went before Rob comes back. And at that point I vowed if I ever do another record with Graham, because we always suspected at some point in the future may do something again, right?
Yeah.
I said, we're doing an Impellitteri record, but you're going to do your vocal, your style, except I'm doing the music my way, you know. And that's kind of, you know, was the revenge. So System X.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic.
I don't know if I answered your question or if I went on a detour. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I don't even remember what my question was.
Neither do I.
It's a great album.
I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
But that's how System X came to be, you know, and I really like that record a lot.
You know, the other thing is again, looking at your discography. So Wicked Maiden, 2009. This was Rob Rock, then came back to the band.
Yeah.
That was kind of I don't know if you want to call it a return to form album or something like that, but that album was, I mean, it's a great album. I mean, it's really heavy and really aggressive, but it's such an Impellitteri album.
Wicked Maiden,
yeah.
I mean, it's Rob Rock's all over it. It just shows you how important Rob is, or even Graham,
right?
How important they are and how individually unique they are as vocals.
Yeah.
What they bring to the table is a melodic structure that's very unique to only them. You know, when I hear Rob, I mean, you know what's interesting? Rob, I know him so well, and Graham, to be fair, that I can write music with James and the drummer and play, and their voice is already in my head, and I already know before they even open their mouth and start to sing, I already know what they're going to do, right? And when I hear Wicked Maiden, I hear Rob, it's like, Rock's back. Because he's affecting the sound of the record, right?
Yeah.
The 3-part harmonies, the layers, you know, his melodic, the way he sings. You know, he's very influenced by guys like Dennis DeYoung of Styx, Lou Graham's another one.
Sure.
So I hear that all over Wicked Maiden, even though Wicked Maiden's a pretty heavy record, you know.
Yeah.
But I hear Rob come in and it affects our sound.